Many of my clients who come to me are writing a book about something that's happened to them in the past. Inside their book, there are people who could potentially come and ask questions about that book. It's all about reputation management. And so that's why I've asked Shoni, who is a reputation management specialist, to come and chat to us about reputation management, what to put out into the media, a little bit of a media training masterclass, if you would say so. So Shoni, thank you so much for coming to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about Ambani Reputation Management and what your company does.
Ambani Reputation Management, now in its 10th year, we do exactly that. We manage people and organizations' reputations. Now, reputation, it's a journey, it's not an event. So what you're looking at is you want to build it, you want to enhance it, you want to protect, and obviously you want, along the journey, find ways of minimizing risk, because the fact that you've put certain things in place doesn't mean things won't happen to you as an individual or as a business. So our job is to make sure that first we do what we call a reputation risk audit. Where are you exposed? And then we start finding ways of mitigating those things. And of course, we use a variety of tools, among others, media, traditional media, owned media as they call it, and stakeholder engagement, because reputation sometimes is not just what matters to the majority of the people, but you might find that there's only 10% of the people who have the biggest impact on what your potential reputation in the future could be. So that's really what we do in a nutshell.
That's true, because sometimes it could just be one person who's upset with you who could just make everything come crashing down.
Absolutely.
So one of the issues that my authors have is fear. Something has happened to them in the past, and they're going to be writing about it. And very often the people that, in fact, every time someone comes to me and they want to write a book, I decline clients that I'm thinking it's just not going to work. So when they do come to me, I know that they've got a story to tell. I know that they can help people in that story, but then they hold back and they say, but what if this happens or that happens? Can I completely tarnish my reputation through this? And I had a conversation with you recently about that with a client who had that particular concern. Just tell us a little bit what your response was to that particular question.
So let me start by giving a sort of a general view, and I might come back to this a little later. The very essence of or the foundation of our civilization as a society is based on information, learnings. Imagine if Newton had discovered what he discovered and kept it to himself, or Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, who wrote the first algorithm, kept that to himself. We would not be as far as we are today as a society. So the first thing is to say, we need to be brave. That said, there are things you could do to mitigate the potential risks. For instance, you could speak in general terms. So you could look at that particular instance and say, what other instances exist that I've encountered? And then you speak as a general view of what happens around certain circumstances. And in other instances, you could just omit people's names, for instance, and actually, you put out the disclaimer in the beginning, of course, to say, this is the names have been changed to protect the people who are involved. But because the issue is so important, it needed to be talked about. And this is what I've observed. This is what I believe the solution ought to be. And these are my views. And that gives you some level of protection from a potential lawsuit. And essentially damaging perhaps another person's reputation, because I believe that is not the intention. The intention is actually to share knowledge. And that is, I think, a lot more important than, holding back something that could be potentially useful to a whole lot of other people out there.
I totally agree with you, because what I'm finding with some people is when they have this trauma of something bad that has happened to them and they're holding back, it does stop other people from learning, from seeing what the potential stumbling blocks are and how they can correct that. And it reminds me of a thing where they say forgiveness is not a place you move from, it is a place, or not a place you move towards, it is a place you move from, that we have forgiveness and we write from there and say, this is what happened, these are the circumstances. But particularly one of the issues that one of my clients has is that many years ago, she got labeled in the press. And it was a very damaging thing. But my question is what responsibility does the press have to fact check? Because in this situation, the facts were not checked, and one or two people had foresight and contacted the press beforehand, but she was of the opinion that the press automatically fact checks, and that because it didn't happen, her reputation was very badly damaged and she struggled to get employment after that.
That's very sad. One of the main differences between social media and traditional media is because we rely on the value chain within the newsroom. The journalist, the sub-editor, the revised sub-editor, and the news editor to go through that value chain to make sure that the facts are right. Well, if it's an English-based newspaper, that the Queen's language is done properly. So we absolutely rely on the media, and I think if the media does not take the issue of fact-checking seriously, they're going to go, they might as well become another social media platform. You know, most people today, when they see something on social media, before they take it as fact, they Google and see if there's a story related to the same subject. And then with that, because that we assume would have been fact-checked, that's when we have some level of comfort that the story is probably right. But that said, it doesn't mean you need to just sit back and take it. But there are ways of dealing with the press in terms of raising issues that are of concern in terms of the coverage that they've done. So you could call the journalist as a point of departure. Listen, thank you for taking an interest in my story. However, I did feel it was important to bring XYZ to your attention because actually this was very damaging and it's simply not true. Can we do something about that? Most media platforms today are online. So it's not a big ask for a journalist to go and correct a story if you can prove that what was written is actually factually incorrect. And I think a good journalist will be able to listen to that. And however, if the damage is so great and the journalist refuses to take your case on, that's when you escalate the matter to either the news editor or the editor-in-chief. And if, again, you get no joy, we have an ombudsman, a press ombudsman. That's when you go to the press ombudsman and lodge your case there. However, I always say to people, be very careful which battles you want to fight with the media. You don't want to take up a war with someone who buys ink by the barrel. It's never a good idea. But it doesn't mean the media in general have the right to tarnish people's name for no particular reason out of either incompetence or just somebody failing to do their job. Yes, we understand that the media have suffered greatly in recent times in terms of financial model, of they're battling to try to find a financial model that works. Most newsrooms have been decimated. So in places where you will have, 20 journalists, you probably have like 7 or 8 today. So consequently, they are under enormous pressure to still deliver the same quantity of story with the same level of quality and frequency as they used to before, but with much reduced resources. So the thing to do is to try and, one, understand the pressure they're working on, but then get to a situation where you can deal with that process in a way that does not upset them, but again, you're protecting your reputation, because that's important.
So let's say hypothetically we have a situation that comes up, the author's name has been damaged. How would they engage the press afterwards? Would they work with a reputation management company? What would you advise a client to do to say, from this point, this is how we're going to move forward to mitigate what's happened over here?
So our industry in reputation management, like any other industry, you have the very big companies, medium size, and the small ones. So the advice is find someone who might be fit for your budget, and then get some guidelines. So it depends obviously on your budget. If you have a budget where you want somebody to hold your hand throughout the process, then you do that. But if you don't have the budget, you get what we're doing today, which is a crash course. And part of that will be to try and help you anticipate the most difficult questions when you engage with the press. The do's and the don't do's when you engage with the press. And something that no one ought to be told or shouldn't have to be written in a book is that don't lie to journalists. But unfortunately, people do. Organizations do all the time. They call it spin. It's actually a short-term way of solving a problem. Because the moment a journalist realizes that you've lied to them, that's it, you're done. It will take you several years to recover from that. So to answer your question briefly, get someone who can help you, even if it's like a couple of hours session to say, okay, this is my situation. How do you suggest I go through this process? And also, this is what I require from you. I need to know what sort of questions I should anticipate. I need to know how do I prepare myself for that engagement? And most importantly, which media houses should I go and engage with? Because not everybody speaks with everybody else. There are media houses that are obviously more widespread. Some are targeted, and you want to make sure that you're talking to the right audience for your message. Right.
You had a comment that you made to me many years ago, and I repeat that comment to so many people. It was something in the line of, tell it yourself, tell it first, and tell it fast. Mm-hmm. Just explain to us how that works.
So when you're managing a crisis in particular, and by the way, managing a crisis well is also another way of building a reputation, because you can come out smelling like roses on the basis of how you engaged or dealt with that crisis. Be this may, so when something happens, instead of sitting back and hope that it will go away, which is what most people do, you have to immediately be ahead of the narrative. You need to be determining what the narrative ought to be. So that's telling it fast. Tell it fast, as it says, make sure that you're engaging with as many as possible and as quickly soon after the event as possible. And so because people have a tendency of thinking that if I don't talk to the media, well, that's it, it's sealed. No, the journalists don't need your permission to talk about you. They will talk about you, but you want them talking about you with your input. Ideally, you want them to carry your message first before the counter messages come through. Granted, a good journalist will need to balance their story. They'll listen to your story, and they'll need to go to listen to the other affected parties. But it's better to be telling it first, telling it fast. That way you stay ahead of the curve, and your message has a better chance of landing well.
So one of the last things that I want to chat to you about is that when we are busy writing things that are going to be helpful to other people, do we need to have permission to share the stories if we're not actually saying who the people are?
Well, that's a tricky one. On the one hand, if you're not going to share the names of the people who are involved, unless they're family members and you don't want them to be surprised about a family history, that, I think it's courteous to share that with them. But otherwise, I would say, you go ahead and you publish. What I will advise is be sure of the facts. You don't want something going out there and then get challenged and then run the risk of maybe somebody winning the lawsuit and have every book pulled out of the shelves, all the time and effort that went into writing the book. Can you imagine just losing that overnight? So I think in terms of fact checking, in terms of the responsibility of making sure that you're putting out there what is factual, what is true, what is useful, authors probably of books probably do the most work than maybe journalists, because with journalists you're chasing whatever is most topical today. Whereas if you're writing a book, you have spent time. I mean, take Alison's book, for instance, Belonging. You can just see how much effort went into creating a book like that. A lot of reflection and a lot of consulting previous material, so that you make sure that your story is told as factually correct as possible, and that there's flow, and then you draw people into it. I mean, I was reading it recently on my way to Cape Town on the plane, 2 hours, but it was a breeze because of the way that the story was told, how you're invited in the story, how she talks about her background, and within the context of the South Africa that she lived back then. So that's some of the things that you definitely want to pay great attention to. Do I have my facts right? And am I comfortable that if wherever this book lands, that it can stand up to scrutiny. Yes.
And I think one of the big challenges is that you have to accept that you probably are going to get some criticism.
Absolutely.
It just happens. And I think that all of the big inventors, some of the people that you've mentioned as well, they had people saying, we don't like it, we don't like the way you're doing things. But all of those, when you're brave, like you mentioned, that's when we make the world a better place.
I'll give you an even better example. You remember Galileo Galilei, right? He proposed in writing a astronomical model called heliocentrism, which is the sun is at the center, the planets and the earth revolve around it. Now, the Catholic Church did not take that very well, because at the time, the belief was that the earth was at the center, not just the center of the solar system, but the center of the galaxy, the center of the universe, because that way, in their view, it emphasized the value of humanity in the grand scheme of things. And he went out there and he said, actually, no, you're wrong. He was given house arrest for that little stunt of his. But he was brave enough because the information was important enough to share. And he was willing to put himself out there, which is what is going to happen to many authors, where you're sometimes confronted with the issue of what is in journalism. We have what we call what's in the public interest. So if the public interest trumps the other minor peripheral issues, then the book is worth writing about, or the story is worth writing about.
I like that. That's getting a little bit of injection and courage into people.
Yes.
So Shani, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Kim.
There you have it, gang. Have a look at the next episode to find out what's happening in the author world. And remember, be brave and get your book out there.